All right, guys, today we are starting Chapter 7. Chapter 7 is going to be over rational expressions and equations. So we talked about functions or rational numbers, and that's our fractional numbers. Our rational expressions and equations are going to be fractional and have variables in the top and or bottom, but specifically the bottom of the fraction is our rational, and what we consider a rational expression or equation. Now, before we get too far into that, first thing we're going to talk about is inverse and direct variation. Now, direct variation we've talked about before, mainly in Algebra 1. And it's defined by the general form y equals a times x as a direct variation. Now, it's not the only way we can write it, because we can say y equals a times x. Or we can say x is equal to a times y. Or we can get x and y on the same side. We can divide both sides by x and tell us that y over x is equal to a. These are all the same form of direct variation. They're just different ways to write it. Inverse variation, two variables, x and y, show inverse variation when they are in the following form. Y is equal to a over x. Or we can say x is equal to a over y, or we can say that x times y is equal to a, where a is a constant amount. It does not change. It is the same for each given value of x and y. Now, with inverse variation, as one increases, so as x increases, y is going to decrease, because they're inverse of each other. As one increases, the other decreases. Or as one decreases, the other increases. However, with direct variation, as say x increases, y is going to increase. And as x decreases, y is going to decrease. Or as x gets closer to 0, y is going to get closer to 0. As x gets farther away from 0, y is going to get farther away from 0. So they're either both going to go in the same direction for direct or opposite directions for y, or inverse. Questions on direct or inverse variation? All right. First thing we're going to do, tell whether x and y show a direct variation, inverse variation, or neither. So we look at A, x times y equals 5. What do y'all think? Direct or inverse, or neither? It'd be inverse. It does match up, because our inverse variation was y equals a over x, x equals a over y, or we could say that x times y is equal to a. In A, it's just a value. So that would indeed be inverse variation, inverse. How about B? Because it does have one thing that does tell us that it's going to be neither. What do y'all think that is? Minus 4. Yeah, direct and inverse variation, both of these are dealing with multiplication. Because our direct variation, y is equal to a times x, or we can say x is equal to a times y, or y over x equals a. Really, we can say x over y equals a as well. We have this multiplication. C. It's actually not going to be neither. It's going to be direct. Now, there's a few ways we can look at C. One of them is that we actually have 1/2 times y is equal to x, because y over 2, 1/2 times y are the same thing. So we're just multiplying it by an a. The other option is to get y by itself, so I can multiply both sides by 2, and our 1/2 times 2 is 1, showing us y is equal to x times 2, or 2x, which does look more like our direct, but it is still a direct variation. Questions A, B, C? Not too bad. Let's look at 1, 2, 3. Number 1. So y equals a over x equals a over y, x times y equals a for inverse. Does it match up to one of these three? For 6x equals y. Or does it match up to one of these three? Because we have a number times x, yes? Here, inverse, all of our numbers are being divided by x or y, or the two are being multiplied together, yes? Direct, we have a times x or a times y. And what is a? A is a what? So what is a taking the place of? A is just a number. So in this case, it would be 6. So this is actually direct. Like in C, on the one we did just before this, a was either 1/2 or 2. A is just a constant number. Let's look at number 2. X times y equals negative 0.25. Inverse, direct, or neither? Inverse, because this is our x times y is equal to a. And the next one would indeed be neither. The big giveaway is the plus sign. Let's look at the last set of 3, A, B, C. X times y equals 17. Inverse. Y equals x plus 29. Neither. Y over 10 equals x. Direct. Questions on classifying the equations? We feel good about these 3 here, or these 9 actually. All right. We feel good with that. Let's actually look at it, determining if it's direct variation, inverse variation, or neither based off the points. Now, we do have several equations for direct inverse variation. Direct. But there's 2 in particular that we're going to use to determine if a given set of numbers is direct or inverse. Now, for a given equation, the a value will stay the same. It's going to be a constant. It's a number. And if I look at a set of data and compare the y to the x, either dividing or multiplying, and I get the same value, it will tell me if it's direct, inverse, or neither. So the first one we're going to look at is A, direct variation. And these sets of x and y values will vary directly if y over x equals the constant term a. So we'll look at the xy pairs. So our first y value is negative 12. Its corresponding x value is 2. And negative 12 divided by 2 is negative 6. Let's move on to the next one. Our next y value is negative 6. The x value is 4. Negative 6 divided by 4 is negative 3 halves. It doesn't divide evenly. Are those the same amount? No, so that means that this set of points, these sets of numbers, are not a direct variation. The next one we have is inverse. And if it's an inverse, the x and y, if we multiply them together, we should get a constant amount. So the first one we can do is what? 2 times negative 12 is negative 24. Okay. We're going to move on to the next one. 4 times negative 6. which would be negative 24. Okay. Our next one after that is 6 times negative 4, which is negative 24. And lastly, we have 8 times negative 3, which is, do we have the same constant amount each time?
Yes.
So that means that this here is in inverse variation. Questions on this here? Are you ready for the next one? We don't have to start with direct. I'm just going to start with direct. Y over x equals a. We're going to start off with the first one, which is going to be 2 divided by 1, which is 2. 4 divided by 2 is. So we've gotten 2 twice so far. Why do you think it's not going to be this one? What is 8 divided by 3? Well, it's not 2, yeah. So it's not going to be direct. Inverse. X times y equals a. So our first one's 2 times 1, which is? 2. Our next one would be 2 times?
Not that one.
Neither. This is actually a quadratic. Or, no, sorry, it's exponential. Because this one here should be y equals 2 to the x. Because 2 to the first power is 2, 2 squared is 4, 2 cubed is 8, and 2 to the fourth is 16. So it's an exponential function. Question on either one of these here. Let's look at this next one. Negative 4, 20, negative 3, 15, negative 2, 10, negative 1, 5. Direct. Y over x is equal to a. So our first y value is 20 over negative 4. 20 divided by negative 4 is what? Negative 5. 15 divided by negative 3. Negative 5. 10 divided by negative 2. Negative 5. And 5 divided by negative 1 is. So this one is indeed direct. If it is one of them works, the other's not. Either direct is going to work, or inverse is not, or inverse is going to work, and direct is not, or neither of them works, and it's neither. So looking at number 5, do we still want to start with direct or start with inverse? Up here, inverse. Because it really doesn't matter which one we start with. We're going to start with one or the other. X times y is equal to a. We have 1 times 60, which is 60, yes. 2 times 30, still 60. 3 times 20 is 60. And lastly, 4 times 15 is 60. Because this here, the x values are getting farther away from 0, and the y values are getting closer. On the last one, the x values are going closer to 0, and so are the y's. So they're going in the same direction. Questions?
I just looked at it and said, well, it's not direct.
Because one's increasing, the other is.
All I had to do was whip out my calculator and multiply 4 times 15, because I didn't know what that was, and then I figured out that it was.
Yep. And I would make sure that they work all the way through, because they could throw one at the end that doesn't work, and it messes it all up.
First 3 were all 60. No, 4 times 15 right off the top of my head.
4 or 15 times 2. and then times by 2 again. Questions on these here? Do you feel comfortable with these here? Let's look at the last question. Writing an inverse variation equation. The variables x and y vary inversely. So what that means is that our equation is y equals a over x. And when y is 4, the x value is 3. Write an equation that relates x and y. So the first thing we're going to have to do is write an equation. And after we write the equation, we need to find the value of y when x is -2. There's 2 parts of this. The homework is going to ask for both parts. But the first thing we need to do is find the value of a to get our equation. There's 2 ways we can do it. One of them is using this equation here. Or we can say that, x times y is equal to a. We can use the equation we just used to determine if it is inverse. Now the reason this equation is nicer than the original is they did tell us the value of x, which is 3, and the value of y was 4 for this given amount. Well, what is 3 times 4? So the value of a is 12. So our equation that we're looking for is y is equal to 12 over 12 over x. You will need that. That is part of your answer. So we found the first half of the answer. Write an equation that relates x and y. Y equals 12 over x. Then what? Find y when x is what? Find y when x is -2. So all we've got to do is take the equation y equals 12 over x and replace x with what? -2. What's 12 divided by -2? Nice job. Very well done. Questions on how we got our 2 parts, because we need the y equals x, or 12 over x, and y equals -6. We need both parts. Guys. We good with this here? Let's look at this next one. Variables x and y vary inversely. So our starting form, or the general form for this equation, y equals a times x, a over x, not a times x, a divided by x. So to find the equation, we first need to find the value of a, because if we can find a, we have the equation. And y equals 8 when x is 4. Write an equation that relate x and y, then find y when x is -16. Well, to find a, we know that when x and y vary inversely, that x times y is indeed equal to a. So we can do what? 4 times 8 is equal to a. So 4 times 8 is 32. All right, guys. And the last thing we need to do is find the value of y when x is -16. So we replace x with -16. 32 divided by -16 is -2. So our 2 answers are y equals 32 over x and y equals -2. 2 parts. Questions on this here? Do we have questions on any of these here? Do we need to see another example of one of these here? If it doesn't reduce, especially solving for y, we get like 21 over 2. Leave it as 21 over 2. If it doesn't reduce, leave it as a fraction. That's it.